right, I think we are live now. Hello, everyone. Let me wait maybe 1 minute to make sure everybody, gets in. All right, I'm going to start right now. How is the sound? Can you all hear me? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Ahlam Muhtaseb. I'm a professor of communication studies at California State University, San Bernardino. I'm also the director of the Center for the Study of Muslim and Arab Worlds, which we just recently changed from the Center for Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies in an attempt to decolonize the name of our center. I welcome you all today to join us. But before I begin, I would like to start by acknowledging that Cal State San Bernardino, or CSUSP, sits on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Serrano Yuhaviatam people and also of the Tongva people throughout the Los Angeles region to the edge of San Bernardino. On behalf of the Center for the Study of Muslim and Arab Worlds, I welcome you all to our film screening and discussion of Al Jazeera's documentary, The Lobby. Today, we are joined by two amazing guest speakers, and I'm grateful for them to spare some of their busy time to come and talk to us, Ms. Karen Holmes and Mr. Muhammad Al-Qasim, who I will introduce shortly after actually the film screening. Our center is a multidisciplinary center hosted in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, but it has members from across campus, actually. And its core mission is dedicated to broadening and decolonizing knowledge of the Muslim and the Arab worlds, through teaching, research, and community outreach. So let me tell you a little bit about The Lobby. It's a documentary that was first released in 2007 by Al Jazeera channel, international media channel. And the first, lobby documentary was actually focused on England and the way the Israeli lobby functions there and spies on people and, all these practices. And then Al Jazeera announced that it has a second lobby documentary that is aimed at the United States. But that actually documentary was silenced and was not released, and we will talk about this in more details in the discussion. But what was interesting is that when the Electronic Intifada, it's another independent media outlet, leaked the documentary last year, many of my colleagues were absolutely shocked actually to watch it and see all these practices, revealed. But for us who teach and research Palestine, scholars and also students, even staff members in academia, it was just a painful reminder for us of the constant attempts to silence, intimidate, threaten, and even destroy us actually professionally. I will discuss some of these experiences with my guests after the screening of the film, but before we start the live stream, please note that the quality of the live stream of the screening now, it's not going to be the best because of the setup. So please feel free to watch it independently. You can click on the link that I actually put on the screen, which is bit.ly/TheLobbyCampusCut. And, I should thank Ms. Holmes for providing us with the shorter cut for campus use. It was very helpful because the original one is 3 hours and 17 minutes, so we couldn't have done it today. But anyway, if you want, you could go to that link, watch it when we start the live stream now, and join us at the end of the film for the discussion at the same link. We are going to be on YouTube, and we are going to be on Facebook. We are not going away. So you could just come back and join us. All right. And I will introduce the guest speakers afterwards. But now and by the way, this is the first time I use StreamYard. And I'm really very anxious, but hopefully it's going to work. This is an attempt to defy the monopolization of information technology by tech giants like Zoom. And we are defying Zoom because they had been actually very active in silencing Palestinian voices. So first, I'm going to remove the guest speakers for now. Just a second. And I'm going to turn off my cam, but I can't turn off my sound. And share screen. You can, of course, you are welcome to send us your comments here. Just 1 second. Okay.
Using an undercover reporter, Al Jazeera's investigative unit infiltrates one of the most powerful lobbies in the world. $38 billion in security agents for all the packages. We examine how the lobby, led by AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has secured unwavering support in Congress. Congressmen don't do anything unless you pressure them. The only way to do that is with money. What the lobby is all about is to make sure that Israel gets special treatment from the United States forever. But after occupying Palestinian lands for half a century, the pro-Israel lobby is facing a new challenge. We called for a full boycott of Israel, divesting from it, and eventually imposing sanctions on it to achieve UN-stipulated rights of the Palestinian people. A movement to boycott, divest, and impose sanctions on Israel, BDS, was formed on American campuses. Seems to be achieving its goals, threatens future American support for Israel. We believe in justice for all people. So that means the occupation has to end. Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs responded with a covert operation to defeat BDS. אתה צריך לעשות את זה עם הרבה מאוד עמימות. זה לא גוף צבאי היררכי שאם הרגנו את X, אז כל הגוף מתחתיו לא פועל. So the Israeli government leverages Jewish organizations in the diaspora. Absolutely. It's a psychological campaign involving spying and smears. Discredit the messenger as a way of discrediting the message. Let's stay on message. But what is that message? BDS is a hate movement. While our reporter monitored pro-Israel groups, he was asked to go undercover for the lobby. You're going into enemy territory, not for everybody. Our undercover reporter, Tony, is British and Jewish and had recently graduated from the University of Oxford. He wrote articles and presented himself as a strong supporter of Israel. In Washington, he attended a course on the Israel-Palestine conflict. I'm from the UK, and I'm just taking a course at Georgetown here over the summer. He networked in the social circles of the pro-Israel lobby. Hi, I'm Rona. Hello, Dana. Nice to meet you. See you. I'm good. Good to see you. Hey. After building his profile, Tony was accepted on a training course in pro-Israel advocacy. Welcome to Fuel for Truth DC's second boot camp. Congratulations, everyone, to being accepted. What we're going to do right now is just kind of introduce ourselves. I'm Daniel. In role-play workshops, they were instructed how to respond to criticism of Israel. And the volunteer. The part-time walls coming up Palestine. Boycott Israel. Divest from Israel. Sanction companies that do business with Israel. It's kind of off the wall. Like 90% of it is bad. This is a photo. I see a wall. Why can Israel Our undercover reporter played the role of pro-Israel advocate. Israel is doing a lot to help the Palestinians. I'd say actually Israel is doing all the best that they can, but it's a tough situation. The people, businesses in Gaza can't freely send their trucks into Israel to sell their goods. I think you find that that's actually a misconception. They do allow their trucks, and what they don't allow is dangerous material. Okay, stop. After the course, Tony was accepted as a volunteer at a pro-Israel communications group called the Israel Project. It's Tony Kleinfeld. Kleinfeld. Like Seinfeld, but with a K. The Israel project, known as TIP, describes itself on its promotional videos as a strategic communications group.
At TIP, we believe we've found the answer. Israel's enemies have left the battlefield of the Middle East and are now fighting on the battlefield of public opinion.
TIP's online promotion claims it shapes the way Israel is framed in the international media.
TIP changes the way thousands of media reports appear every year. And then we add platforms of our own, getting people talking, taking command of the conversations.
Weeks before he started, Tony discussed with a senior manager how TIP deals with the media.
Basically, the following BDS is essentially kind of a hate group targeting Israel. They're anti-peace. Try not to even use the terms because it builds their brand. We just refer to boycotters. The goal is to actually make things happen. Figure out what are the means of communication.
In 2005, Palestinian civil rights groups sought a peaceful means to protest against Israel's occupation. They identified goods from Israel and called for their boycott. The BDS movement was born.
BDS adopted a nonviolent strategy because we think it is morally consistent and very effective against an enemy that is extremely powerful militarily. We called for boycotting Israel, divesting from it, and eventually imposing sanctions on it, as was done against apartheid South Africa, to achieve basic Palestinian rights under international law.
Over the past decade, BDS has grown around the world. By campaigning for Palestinian civil rights in land controlled by Israel, BDS believes it has exposed a deficiency in the moral defense of the Jewish state. Tony had gathered that the lobby's concern with BDS was not its economic impact, but a much wider threat to the power of the pro-Israel lobby.
Specific potential of immediate boycott, that's not a problem. The bigger problem is the Democratic Party, the Bernie Sanders people, bringing all these anti-Israel people, and the Democratic Party pro-Israel is less of a bipartisan issue. And then, every time the White House changes, policies towards Israel change, and that becomes a dangerous thing for Israel. There is an actually important battle being fought on the campus.
The Israel on Campus Coalition is a coordinating group at the front line of the battle against BDS.
We built up this massive national political campaign to crush them, and to fight back, and to fight fire with fire. What we saw was a growing global movement to destroy Israel that was manifesting on American college campuses. It makes sense that they would try to poison our next generation. One thing every member of Congress and president and ambassador and newspaper editor has in common is, by and large, they spent a little bit of time on a college campus. Probably those were formative years.
The Israel on Campus Coalition is at the center of the lobby's response to BDS.
There are about 100, maybe 120 now professionals that are working for a dozen national ICC partner organizations like APAC and Hasbara Fellowships and Stand With Us, Hillel and Chabad and API.
The Israel on Campus Coalition, they really oversee like the whole movement. They're sort of the ones that like are the bird's eye view. Next week, a BDS resolution comes to campus. So the IC will be the ones, they'll organize a conference call with all the partners. So they might say, okay, stay with us, we need a little bit more your help because we need something regarding like BDS resolution. And the newspaper wants us to write like an op-ed, so you guys help like the op-ed. So they'll sort of be the ones and they'll sort of be overseeing it.
Stand With Us and the ICC have a particularly close relationship. Stand With Us holds an annual conference in Los Angeles. Its focus is on how to fight the BDS movement.
To reveal the true nature of BDS, a venomous, deceitful, anti-peace, anti-coexistence movement that will settle for nothing short foundation of the Jewish state.
Jacob Bain from the Israel on Campus Coalition linked BDS to the rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes in America.
Anti-Semitism is increasing in general, right? In the same way that we're seeing anti-Semitism increase in the community, we're seeing these awful, terrifying desecrations of Jewish cemeteries. Campus is no exception.
At the Israel on Campus Coalition in Washington, Tony discovered that the lobby is deliberately adopting a clandestine approach on campuses.
We should stand behind our work, not in front of it. It's not helpful for Stand With Us to say to a pro-Israel student, or any other project we say to a pro-Israel student, oh, sure, we'll help you, but you have to put our logo on it. We're working so closely with Stand With Us, and we have such a tight partnership with them today that it's totally seamless.
Tony also discovered that anonymity is a key strand of the campaign against BDS.
If one of these terrorists on campus wants to disrupt a pro-Israel lecture or something, and unfurl a banner or whatever else, we're going to investigate them, look into bad stuff they've done. That stuff becomes very useful in the moment, and there are any number of ways to push it out. The only thing is that we do it securely and anonymously, and that's the key.
It was Sunday. I was in the kitchen. My partner was in the living room with my daughter. Came in with her laptop, and she said, "You've got to see this."
Bill Mullen has been a campaigner for the BDS movement for years. His wife had been sent a link to a website containing a letter addressed to her.
This letter purported to be by a former student who said that she had been sexually harassed by me, and she had found other students at Purdue who had had the same experience, and she was writing this letter to tell their story.
With the anti-Israel people, what's most effective, what we found, at least in the last year, is you do the opposition research, put up some anonymous website, and then put up targeted Facebook ads.
Within a very short time, within about 48 hours, we were able to establish that these multiple sites that we had found attacking me had been taken out almost at the same time, and that they were clearly the work of the same people.
Every few hours, you drip out a new piece of the opposition research. It's psychological warfare. Drives them crazy.
One of the accounts said that in the process of supposedly putting my hand on her, I'd invited her to a Palestine organizational meeting. And I thought, well, you're sort of putting your cards on the table there, whoever you are. We found out that a student at Purdue, who I work with, had also been targeted.
A former activist with Students for Justice in Palestine agreed to speak only with her face concealed.
It said that I would get drunk and go and have sex with multiple guys, and that's just a huge attack on my character and a massive lie. My parents were very upset. They immediately told me to quit my involvement with SJP.
They either shut down or they spend time responding to it and investigating it, which is time they can't spend attacking Israel. That's incredibly effective.
The main focus was to attack my reputation and my character. Pretty much to mess with me so that I don't want to continue my involvement with SJP.
Could you send me some of these websites? I'd be very curious just to see what they look like.
I couldn't.
You couldn't? Okay.
But, Canary Mission is a good example. Canary Mission is highly, highly effective to the extent that we monitor the Students for Justice in Palestine and their allies.
A few years later, these individuals are applying for jobs within your company.
Canary Mission's promotional video threatens to pass these smears onto prospective employers.
Ensure that today's radicals are not tomorrow's employees. Somebody did contact my employer and asked for me to be fired based on my pro-Palestine activism. They said that, if they continued to employ me, that their values are anti-Semitic. It can be really scary at first. I was mostly harassed via Twitter. They were tweeting me every 2 or 3 days. They take screenshots, even way back to into my Facebook pictures that don't even look like me anymore. Just digging and digging through my online presence.
They're terrified of Canary Mission, and it's about time.
We had always been afraid of ending up on there. It was like very personal. They see us as such a threat that they have to kind of twist and turn and delve into our personal lives as if they were trying to scare us into stopping our work. Their Twitter campaign is relentless. Every picture that I post on Facebook, it goes onto one of their websites with every tweet that I put in. Every hashtag I post on Instagram, it goes into one of their files.
As he left his meeting at the ICC, Tony reflected on the way Jacob Boehm had reacted to his questions about Canary Mission.
We do it securely and anonymously, and that's the key.
It sounds very similar to like a Canary Mission, that kind of thing. Is that, yeah. Are you guys like in touch with them at all, or is there any kind of, no?
Canary Mission is totally anonymous.
Yeah,
it's hard to figure out who's behind it. Canary Mission is highly, highly effective, to the extent that we monitor the Students for Justice in Palestine and their allies. We're doing it back. I mean, not we, but this anonymous group.
We don't know who's behind it. I would ask where they get their money from, because ultimately that tells you where the control is.
Our undercover reporter, Tony, is having a coffee with Eric, his boss at the Israel Project. Tony wanted to find out more about Canary Mission.
There's a guy named Adam Milstein who you might want to meet. He's a convicted felon. That's a bad way to describe it. He's a real estate mogul. When I was working with him when I stayed back, I was literally emailing back and forth with him while he was in jail. But he's loaded. I mean, he's close to $500,000.
Adam Milstein has become a central figure in the lobby. His foundation funds numerous pro-Israel organizations. He also sits on the boards of AIPAC's National Council, the Israel on Campus Coalition, and Stand With Us. Our reporter filmed him alongside Jacob Boehm from the Israel on Campus Coalition at the Stand With Us conference in Los Angeles. The two men had lengthy private discussions. Tony attended the Israeli-American Council's annual conference. At a party, he spotted the IAC's chairman, Adam Milstein.
I'm Tony. I'm in the Israel Project with Eric Gallagher.
Milstein told Tony how critics of Israel should be handled.
First of all, investigate who they are, what's their agenda. They pick on the Jews because it's easy, because it's popular. We need to expose what they really are. And we need to expose the fact that they're exactly everything we believe in. And we need to put them on the run. Right now, they can do whatever they like, terrorize us, and we are. How do we put them on the run, though? Doing it by exposing who they are, what they are, the fact that they're racist, the fact that they're bigger than they got democracy.
Eric said wealthy pro-Israel donors now have the freedom to fight Israel's critics however they want.
In this country, you have these billionaire types who are starting to realize, like, oh wow, I don't need to participate in the Republican and Democratic parties. I could build my own apparatus and have influence in Los Angeles or Detroit. And Al Milstein's one of those guys. And he funds the Israel Project. He does a lot of great work.
Eric then made a remarkable claim when Tony asked about Canary Mission.
We all the people involved with them. It's it. That's it. Adam Milstein. Yeah, I don't know who hired to oversee it. Adam Milstein. He's the guy who funds it. We need to expose the fact that they're everything we believe in. We need to put them on the run. So Adam Milstein, he funds the Israel Project and he's funding the Canary Mission website. Yeah, which is interesting because it makes it seem as though we're a part of it, but we're not. Actually, I was involved with the snack in Name and Shame. He called a group of us to ask us what we thought. I told him actually I thought it was a bad idea, but he did anyway. There's no one on their side doing it, so you don't have to worry about your reputation.
They've lost the political argument. They can now do nothing but resort to personal smears against us. They can't engage us in discussions of the occupation. They can't defend apartheid. They can't defend the bombing
things in Gaza, but they can try to destroy our lives.
The lobby hope that a new partnership with Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs will become a game changer in the fight against BDS.
The Ministry of Strategic Affairs brings together this group called the Global Coalition for Israel, and it's like leading pro-Israel advocacy groups around the world. My view and the view of Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which we coordinate with sometimes, we communicate with sometimes, is like Europe is lost and it's basically over, and like they're turning a lot of attention out of the U.S. because they feel we're on their path.
The secretive Ministry of Strategic Affairs, based in the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, was given a mission: establish a covert campaign to defeat the BDS movement. The campaign includes monitoring the activities of American students.
We use all sorts of technology. We use corporate level, enterprise grade social media intelligence software. Most all of this happens on social media, so we have custom algorithms and formulae that acquire the stuff we need.
We are a different government working on foreign soil, and we have to be very, very cautious. We have 3 different sub-campaigns which are very, very sensitive regarding data gathering, information analysis, working on activist organization, money trail. This is something that only a country with these resources can do the best. If we want to win, we have to change our ways. We have to think differently. And this is waging a holistic campaign against the other side. Take him out of his comfort zone. Make him be on the defensive.
In the United States, the lobby is working with Israel to spy on American citizens.
We're giving them data. For example, one day, Sima's deputy sending me a photo, just a photo in WhatsApp. So you can boycott Israel on a billboard. In a few hours, our systems and analysts could find the exact organization, people, and even their names where they live. We gave it back to the ministry. I have no idea what we did with this. But in fact, 3 days later, there were no billboards.
Our undercover reporter was attending a dinner at the annual conference of the Israeli-American Council in Washington. The 3-day conference brings together the constellation of pro-Israel lobby groups in the US. On the surface, things seem to be looking good for Israel.
Israel's booming. It's the startup nation. More venture capital is going into Israel today than at any other time in history. So why don't we just calm down and realize that BDS is worthless, it's losing, and ignore it? I don't think BDS was ever supposed to be about getting colleges to take their money out of Israel. So if we focus on the dollars, we can feel really good about ourselves. If we focus on the fact that an effort's being made to distance us, those who love Israel, from the rising generation, I think we need to worry. When you get to the millennials and the students, it's a bad situation. And it's getting to the point now where the majority is more favorable towards the Palestinians than the Israelis.
While numerous speakers discuss ways to combat BDS, the lack of civil rights for Palestinians living under Israeli control was not raised.
Nobody talks about the reason why BDS exists at all. What's the model for the BDS movement? The model is South Africa. So, was that a bad thing to do?
An apartheid regime which denied equal rights to black South Africans was weakened and ultimately collapsed after a global economic and political boycott.
They're worried that the BDS movement will get to the stature that the South Africa boycott got to. So they're trying to stop it now.
In order to discredit the apartheid label, the lobby has launched a campaign to try to co-opt black South Africans.
home angry at BDS. They felt lied to. They felt that someone had tried to steal their narrative. This is an effective tool. Bringing these Black, South African, former BDS activists, now Israel supporters to American campuses.
During his volunteership, Tony learned that the Israel Project has been developing a strategy called Stop Stealing My Apartheid. The plan is to feed articles written by Black South Africans into the American media, claiming that BDS has distorted their history.
If you're disgusted by segregation in this country, if you're disgusted by South African apartheid, then you should also be disgusted by Israeli apartheid.
Another workshop was addressed by Israeli diplomats from consulates in the US. Black Lives Matter had attracted particular criticism after voicing support for the BDS movement. It appears that Israel's diplomats may be trying to challenge the apartheid label by canvassing support amongst African Americans.
The major problem of Israel is with the young generation of the Black community. Black Lives Matter starts there. I had last week sit down dinner at my house with 40 people, which are considered the leadership of the Black community. And it's very important. They can be part of our doing an activity.
Pro-Israel groups are trying to cultivate a new generation of Black leaders that is pro-Israel by bringing them to APEC conferences on all expenses paid trips, by taking them on delegations to Israel.
They're doing that because they're afraid of BDS and they're afraid of Black Lives Matter, which is this new struggle for Black freedom that also sees Black freedom as situated in a larger context. In 2014, Israel launched a siege of Gaza. In the same summer, police in Ferguson killed Mike Brown, and Ferguson rose up. And on the news at night, there would be both the latest out of Gaza and the latest out of Ferguson. There was solidarity that was expressed online with the Ferguson uprising. There were Palestinians who took to Twitter to cheer on the rebels of Ferguson and explain how to deal with tear gas.
Israel's diplomats have responded by evoking the legacy of Martin Luther King, claiming that the campaign for Palestinian civil rights bears no resemblance to the civil rights movement in America.
Dr. Clarence C. Jones, who wrote the draft speech for Martin Luther King, I had a dream. He was his lawyer, he was his most friend, he was somebody that I reached out to, he became a very, very close personal friend. Because of that relationship, we published 3 articles in the Huffington Post explaining why their agenda was hijacked. Martin Luther King will turn in his grave if he saw the anti-Israel tendency or policies that are starting to emerge in Black Lives Matter.
There's something on one hand laughable about it, but there's something also really insidious about this. You're using the credibility of a freedom struggle to try to oppose another freedom struggle. And I think that's appalling.
Soon after Black Lives Matter declared support for BDS, a fundraiser at a New York nightclub was suddenly cancelled. The venue's management said it didn't approve of the movement's stance on Israel. Tony was told by his boss, Eric, that the Israel Project was behind the decision.
I don't know if you saw that this club ditched a Black Lives Matter event. And he used the thing down. One of our donors, we just put a call to him and he pushed the call to the police.
Wow, to shut down this Black Lives Matter event. I think it's really appalling that a system in Israel has devised incredible and comprehensive ways to have a violent regime against Palestinians. And they would also invest resources into making sure to shore up support for that oppression here.
One evening at the IAC conference, Tony met a prominent activist. He's associated with the hardline trend in the pro-Israel lobby. Noah Pollock argues that tough tactics are needed to counter the apartheid label.
The activism has been very collaborative, and we feel like attention getting just like total no given. Like we're going to be more pro-Israel than you can imagine.
Pollock believes the American public, unlike those in Britain, will accept his gloves-off strategy.
The majority of Americans are pro-Israel. Whereas if you think about the UK, it's just pure hatred. Your country, like, basically let half Pakistan fit in. So you have a different problem than you here. There is an actual direct connection between the people who were involved in raising money for Hamas and people who are involved in BDS activism on American campuses today.
Pollock claims that SJP is just a front to hide the real agenda of American Muslims for Palestine.
You'll notice their name is Students for Justice in Palestine. You don't hear the word Islamic, you don't hear the word Muslim in that name, and you hear the word justice, which is kind of a buzzword on campuses today. Everyone is for justice, right? You're not for injustice. The crowd that's kind of behind the scenes is actually a very Islamic radical cause. And if you actually get into the weeds on SJP, they've aligned with groups that are for not just the destruction of Israel, the destruction of America.
Pollock even accuses Jewish supporters of BDS of being in league with Hamas.
Jewish Voice for Peace, or as I call it, Jewish Voice for Hamas. They it'd be like having a group called African Americans for Slavery. It's crazy, right? A lot of the JVP people are not Jewish. They've had a real problem of people basically pretending to be Jews because the anti-Israel activism it's a little more sexy.
You're here speaking with the rabbi. I work for Jewish Voice for Peace. We're a Jewish organization. Again, I think that's another kind of absurd claim.
When you talk about SJP and when you talk about BDS, you talk about them as a hate group, as a movement that absolutely endorses violence against civilians, not military conflict, but violence against civilians, aka terrorism. You discredit the messenger as a way of discrediting the message.
Tony was told of a demonstration that Noah Pollock was organizing. A bus took protesters to an event organized by the pro-BDS movement, Students for Justice in Palestine.
Hey man, I'm Tony. Nice to meet you.
This is one of those things where either it's the BDS or we're just running.
Like Andy and join them.
The protesters are on a fellowship program run by a conservative think tank called the Hoover Institution.
The whole fellowship extravaganza, you guys are being foot soldiers conservative. This is actually the first foot soldier activity that I think is important to do. Tony, what's your connection to the conspiracy that we're all part of?
Yeah, the Israel Project.
Not come. Their plan is to disrupt the National Conference of Students for Justice in Palestine. Marshall said that the pro-Israel protest had been poorly planned.
It's a very fly-by-the-pants procedure. It was basically just like Noah Pollock coming and being like, look, there are these jihadis who basically had a suicide bombing, and they're on a campus, and you have to stop them.
So chance to shout at Arabs?
As we're leaving, we mentioned to our boss yesterday that we're going. She's like, oh yeah, that's mandatory. You need to go.
While they've been told they have to take part in the protest, not everyone on the bus is convinced it's good for their reputation.
You know what my worst nightmare is? I'm actually not kidding. It's a photo of Dion and I together. And we're just clearly identifiable. And they're like, oh, we're these traitors who sold out to the Jewish conspiracy for money. I'm like, we did. We cost $50,000 plus benefits.
As the bus leaves, they discuss whether there's any point in staging the protest.
Just skeptical
of using the protesting tactic against them?
That's not our demographic. They don't like the reason protests work is when like the people involved really care about it and like want to be there.
When a protest is sponsored and organized by outsiders, but made to appear like a popular grassroots movement, it's known as astroturfing.
They did a really job of getting me excited to show up and protest.
It kind of, the way you're putting it kind of sounds a bit like astroturfing.
No, this is astroturfing. No, this is actually the definition.
What does that mean?
This is when you set up things.
It's the difference between grassroots and astroturf.
It's not that astroturfing is wrong. It's just that like your astroturf has to be like committed.
The bus arrives at George Mason University, where Students for Justice in Palestine is holding its national conference. But the protesters can't find the conference hall.
They pull over and ask, "Hey, where are all the jihadis?"
The driver sees two students and stops to ask directions. One is wearing a headscarf.
Wait. Oh, no. Come on. We're like, back to DC! Back to DC! I believe the town is okay. No, cool.
Excuse me, do you know where the Johnson Center is?
Okay, just down this. Okay. Okay, thank you.
That was problematic.
So this is off to a good start.
Students for Justice in Palestine really is a student-led type of organization focused around promoting the BDS cause.
1967.
We have workshops on how to run a divestment campaign, finding intersections on campus, building alliances. Right now, Palestine has been essentially normalized on campuses.
The bus finally arrives. Noah Pollock's protest is not a student event. To avoid breaking university regulations, he's arranged a legal briefing.
The SGP conference is on the third floor, and we're going to go up and in a respectful and quiet way protest them. Gail is a legal expert and is going to talk a little bit about that.
We are here, of course, as guests at the university, so we don't want to be accused of disrupting a school-sponsored activity. It is against the law to use abusive or violent language, so we're going to use peaceful, good language. If we see that they're doing anything that is bad behavior, don't engage, remain calm. If you do happen to speak with any reporters, just stay on message. And what is that message? SJP is a hate group. BDS is a hate movement. The only other thing you probably want to mention is that SJP endorses violence, terrorism, things like that. And you guys are going to be great.
We're not there to promote. We're not there to have any sort of incident at all. We're nice people.
We start seeing groups of people coming towards us who don't seem familiar, and then brandishing Israel flags and then posters and signs.
Tony joined the demonstration.
Support democratic society, but if you want to, what do you think of this?
Great. Resistance? Child suicide bombers?
How do you respond to such a wild accusation that's not grounded in anything and that's just designed to shift attention? Oh wait, we support suicide bombers. That's ridiculous.
Social justice left supports radical terrorism.
You don't want dialogue? We're here to talk to you. I'll turn your ass.
You'd think if like they were gonna do, they'd try to shake it up and mix it up with new accusations.
We don't support radical Islamic terrorism in this country. We don't support suicide bombers. Cowards who kill children and women. They leave orphans. We don't support that.
Kill babies in strollers. That'll bring peace. Yeah, Palestinian terrorists all over Israel. That would be it.
Real baby killers, these terrorists. They kill women, they kill children, they don't care about it. Rape women all the time.
It takes a lot to hear this and not respond. and to turn your back to them and to not look back at them. They were very frustrated at the fact that we weren't responding. They say, "They're not even responding. They're not even responding."
Look at how they wave the Palestinian flag at our country. Look at this. These are the real basket of deplorables. These are the deplorables, people. They cower behind radical Islamism and don't engage in dialogue because they can't win the war of ideas.
There's no responding to our content because there is no refuting our content is grounded in human rights, morality, ethics, international law.
The staged protest had minimal impact on the students at George Mason University. But the headlines shared on social media tell the story Pollock wanted.
Yeah, let's head back to headquarters for debriefing cocktails.
Tony was attending a party run by an advocacy group that he'd joined. A journalist then approached him with an extraordinary proposition. He wanted Tony to work undercover for the lobby at a meeting of BDS activists.
For the Algeminer, so we're trying to recruit some real undercover just to go there and just see what's going on. I think we're trying to get paid for it too. Yeah, I'm gonna sign up on that profile, just kind of see what's going on. Higher up, they put emails later, like you want to do this. For some reason, it pops in my head.
A few days later, a journalist from the Algeminer contacted Tony.
It was the undercover has to be kept pretty quiet. We would like to have some recording device on your person. Any level of potential danger or, difficulty, violence or verbal assault, none of that concerns you or puts you off?
No, because I think I'm pretty good at just being kind of zen in the face of verbal assaults.
The Algeminer claims to be the fastest growing Jewish newspaper in America. It pays particular attention to events on college campuses.
We're working on a project now about ranking U.S. universities and colleges in terms of their anti-Semitic and anti-Israel activities. We have a campus bureau that monitors this sort of behavior and these incidents and these campaigns all day long, all week long.
The Algeminer often reports that anti-Semitism exists amongst pro-Palestinian student groups.
The language that comes from those arenas move into that sphere of the new anti-Semitism, which is anti-Israelism. And that's a big focus at the Campus Bureau, looking at the blurring of those lines and where those boundaries have eroded. As journalists, right, exposure is the goal, exposing truth.
A short time later, the Algeminer contacted Tony once more to discuss his proposed mission to work undercover at a BDS event. The editor explained what they wanted.
One of the projects that we've been looking to do for quite a while is to try and infiltrate some of these groups, get undercover and discover what they're about from the inside. You explain the war, it's a hostile environment, and there's some risk involved. The goal would really be to uncover any evidence of not just bias, but real bigotry, the correlation between the BDS movement and hatred of Jews.
Tony has given a list of persons of interest. They're all on the Canary Mission website.
Go to canarymission.org. Have you heard of Canary Mission?
A little bit. Could you tell me about it?
People who hate it, the people who are being targeted by it, call it a blacklist. You have names here that show up on this database. Students and professors, faculty, speakers, organizations that have ties to terrorism, outright ties to terrorism, or terrorists who have called for the destruction of the Jewish state.
Despite running Canary Mission's Tennessee expose, the Algeminer staff say Canary's identity is still a mystery.
It's an anonymous site. nobody has any idea who's actually running this thing, and people have tried and looked into it.
If you're on board in terms of concept, then I guess the next thing we just need to figure out is the money. Can we wait for a follow-up email from you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I should get that to you within the next 24 hours.
In August 2016, a story in the Allgemeine caused waves in Washington's pro-Israel circles.
The expose was on these anti-Semitic tweets. They uncovered 14 current students, 5 recent graduates at the University of Tennessee that had tweeted all of these horribly anti-Semitic things.
The evidence was released by an anonymous group within the pro-Israel lobby.
They're called Canary missions.
The University of Tennessee is based in Knoxville, a quiet city in the east of the state. Tennessee is conservative and religious. The Christian church has political influence here. 6 out of 10 voters opted for Donald Trump. At the university, students and professors, including opponents of BDS, were taken aback by the headlines.
It said that there was rampant anti-Semitism at the University of Tennessee. This was quite a shock. It was very surreal and strange. I didn't see anything happening on the ground. It all seemed to be internet-based.
There's this international headline with our names and this defamation of our characters. It was the last thing that we were expecting to happen.
I was surprised that they were targeting the University of Tennessee. I mean, there's just not a whole lot going on in Knoxville. It just seems such a benign target.
Several tweets were clear-cut examples of anti-Semitism. Some failed to distinguish between Jewish people and the State of Israel. Others made vile references to the horrors of the Holocaust.
There were definitely some very anti-Semitic things said, but it seemed to be by a limited number of students.
Those tweets are horrible, and that should not be supported by anybody.
One of the students, there were tweets from when they were 14, 15, and 16 years old. People do and say stupid things. I was really horrified that you had essentially this blacklist of students.
Shortly after being named by Canary Mission, posters and flyers linked BDS supporters to Hamas.
There was a list of most of the names of the students that were mentioned in the Canary Mission. All I kept seeing were flyers all over the place. Like, they'll put it on cars, they'll put it on side tables in the student centers and stuff like that.
That kind of scared me to think that there are actually people physically on campus posting these things.
Back in Washington, Aviva is drafting a letter to the University of Tennessee on behalf of the Brandeis Center. They want the university to take a stand.
We're telling them that basically they need to issue a conference statement, they need to investigate the students that are involved, they need to training.
In addition to drawing attention to those responsible for anti-Semitic tweets, their orchestrated release served another purpose. It's part of a wider campaign by the pro-Israel lobby.
The problem right now, I think, on universities is that administrations don't realize that anti-Israel statements or anti-Zionist statements often are also anti-Semitic.
To find out what anti-Semitism means for the lobby, Tony visits Aviva's boss at the Brandeis Center for Human Rights in Washington. Despite its name, it's a pro-Israel lobby group.
Hi, it's great to finally meet you.
Really good to meet you. Kenneth Marcus is involved in the lobby's attempt to redefine anti-Semitism in a way that could include criticism of the State of Israel.
The goal is to have the federal government to
a definition of anti-Semitism that is parallel to the State Department definition.
The US State Department defines anti-Semitism using a three-point test known as the 3Ds. It includes statements that demonize Israel, those that apply double standards, or those that delegitimize the state.
There have been attempts by some to try to define anti-Semitism in such a way that conflates actual anti-Semitism with completely legitimate criticism of Israel or Israeli government policies. They are overly broad and vague to the point where any kind of criticism of Israel or of Israeli government policies can be labeled as anti-Semitic.
The letter that Aviva was sending called for the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, to address a long-standing problem of anti-Semitism on campus. The Brandeis Center is urging American universities to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that could include criticism of Israel.
We are trying to get universities to adopt a uniform definition, whether it's the State Department's definition or a similar version of it, because then we think that the administrators would be able to understand anti-Semitism better and discipline students for hateful and discriminatory actions.
In 2015, Tennessee became the first state legislature to condemn BDS. It's the result of the lobby's attempt to use legal means to quell BDS on campus.
In recent light of anti-Semitic things that have happened here in Tennessee on our college campuses, we are just expressing our support as an ally for the state of Israel. And with that, I renew my motion.
There's an intensive effort by Israel and pro-Israel groups to get governments, universities, legislative bodies to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel and its state ideology, Zionism. According to their definition, if I say to you that I believe that instead of separate Israeli and Palestinian states, there should be a single state where Jews, Christians, Muslims, atheists, everyone has full equal rights, the way they do under the Constitution of the United States, that would make me an anti-Semite because I'm denying Israel's right to be a Jewish state. This has been a key goal of people like Kenneth Marcus and the Brandeis Center, so that they can then go after people who are advocating for equality and bring them up on charges that they're actually anti-Semitic bigots.
You have to show that they're racist hate groups and that they are using intimidation to get funded and to consistently portray them that way.
6 months after the Allgemeine ran its report, an anti-Semitism awareness bill was brought before Tennessee's State Assembly. The bill incorporates the 3Ds definition, which can include criticism of Israel. Kenneth Marcus gave evidence.
When I had read a newspaper article in a major national Jewish newspaper indicating some issues, we independently verified several different issues going on with blogging. I think it was Facebook entries, Nazi-type references to Jews, and the need to kill Jews. They may have dealt with that, but it seems to me it's an indication that the problem is here.
In order to create enough sort of political momentum and hysteria to get these bills through, you need to show that anti-Semitism is rife on campuses. You see groups like the Brandeis Center jumping on headlines which are very dramatic and very scary. Incidents like the one that they claimed happened at the University of Tennessee are certainly helpful in a political sense if you're trying to push legislation like that through.
The right to exist.
Aviva Vogelstein also traveled to Tennessee.
If a student on a campus says, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, meaning that from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, there will be no state of Israel, that would be considered anti-Semitic. Another example would be when students on campus chant things like Intifada, Intifada, we support the Intifada. That's calling for, an Intifada is calling for violence against innocent Israeli civilians. And that is an incitement to violence. And it's calling for demonization and delegitimization of Israel.
7 months earlier, when Aviva was writing the letter to the University of Tennessee, she was talking to a leader of the Jewish community in Knoxville. It seems that she told Aviva that the University of Tennessee doesn't have a long-standing problem of anti-Semitism.
She's like, I've been on campus for 10 years and there have been no actual incidents. But in it's not like it used to be so to be addressed. They're calling this a cesspool of anti-Semitism.
Jewish students at the University of Tennessee repeated this sentiment before the state legislature.
When people say things like we're experiencing anti-Semitism, it hits us pretty hard. When we were told that this was being said about our university and the climate in our university, we were really confused because we had never heard any form of anti-Semitism that was happening on our campus. So this was kind of, the first thing to come to us. So if we're the students who are supposed to have been affected by this so-called climate, you would think we would kind of know about it before.
I think it's important to highlight that any allegations that this bill is based off of, those allegations are purely external allegations, meaning they're coming from all over the country except for Tennessee.
One of the consequences of the allegations of anti-Semitism has been to temper activism for Palestinian equal rights.
I would say last year this time, we had a new sort of adrenaline underneath us, and then this kind of completely killed our fire. And it was hard to gain that momentum once again.
After Aviva spoke to Jewish students in Tennessee, she also learned that their greatest concern is unrelated to pro-Palestinian activism.
Yes, it's not a real movement on the campus. Students are Genocide of Palestine, which has a large following nationwide, has very few active student members. We mostly only have couples with Christians trying to proselytize the Jewish students because in itself, everyone is so
I find it incredibly troubling that at a time when we see a rise in real broad daylight anti-Semitism in the United States, there are those who claim, oh yeah, we're trying to stop anti-Semitism, but what they're actually trying to do is stop advocacy for Palestinian human rights.
Our investigation into the role of the Israeli state at US campuses led Tony to an employee at the embassy in Washington. She's American, and her job is to analyze BDS activity for the Israeli government.
So nobody really knows what we're doing, but mainly it's been a lot of research, monitoring BDS things, reporting it back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, making sure everyone knows what's going on.
Julia was president of the pro-Israel group at Davis, which is part of the University of California. Davis began as a center for agricultural studies, and its students are known as Aggies.
I came to UC Davis, which had a reputation of being a really pro-Israel. Now it's the top 5 most anti-Israel schools in the U.S.
Why is that?
Because of everything that happened in the last few years. It was just particularly bad. And there's a huge Muslim population in Sacramento, which is right next to Davis.
The growing support for the BDS movement in Davis and the lobby's response to it is part of a narrative that's unfolding across America's campuses. Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP, brought a divestment motion before the Student Senate.
I was very, very nervous. The entire room was filled. I think we had about 600 students and people from the community coming in to witness this vote.
I am here today because, quite frankly, I am ashamed. I am ashamed of my university for supporting apartheid and my people in Palestine.
Julia and her pro-Israel allies had already decided that they didn't want to debate.
At 4 a.m. the night before, me and my team were you're going to leave the walkout. I was like, okay. And they're we're going to film it just for our own purposes. I was totally cool. So when everything was happening, we went into it knowing we were going to lose. So our strategy was how to, ultimately win while losing the vote.
Good evening. My name is Julia Rifkin, and I'm the president of Aggies for Israel.
Students streamed the hearing online. The pro-Israel group also filmed it with another purpose in mind. Their videos would play a key part in the story that was to unfold in the days ahead.
We have been ignored and disrespected year after year, but we have never been silenced. We are a beacon of peace and inclusion on a campus enslaved by anti-Semitism. This is our victory. And we who are victorious need not legitimize the words spoken in this empty hearing. So if you are here tonight in opposition to this resolution, I invite you now to stand up. Really, stand up. And join me in walking out of this room.
Our thought was to control the narrative by having the speech that we wanted it to cause attention. We wanted everyone to see us walking out to show them. Like, this doesn't represent us. We're good about this. So that's how we kind of formulated it. That day, all of us released like 50 op-eds in major news sources, so that when people made a hashtag and like a whole thing trending, so when people opened their Facebooks, it wouldn't be them celebrating their victory, it would be us sharing our stories. Student senator who's Muslim made a Facebook status saying like Israel will fall, like Sharia law is taking over Davis, like we love Hamas, like that kind of status. So that happened.
We had been called terrorists and told that we were Hamas sympathizers, that we want to bring Sharia law to campus and things like that.
Hi everyone, my name is Azka Fayaz. I'm a second-year political science major.
Azka Fayaz was a committed BDS activist and claims that pro-Israel students repeatedly tried to link her to political violence.
They just came up to me and said, "You're a terrorist. Are you a terrorist? You're going to bring, terrorism to the student government," and things of that nature.
And vote smart.
I know her. It was ironic. She was directly making a joke of that. When I saw it, though, given the climate at the time, I did grow concerned.
People who were involved, they were like, "Hey, there's actually a lot of negative postings on social media. They're sharing your picture and the cover photo with your caption. It's turning really ugly." That caption was reposted and retweeted over and over and over again. I knew that something big was sort of going to happen.
Pro-Israel students were taunted by pro-Hamas students after an anti-Israel vote passed on campus. Listen and watch. And right after the vote passed, a student senator posted this on Facebook. Hamas and Sharia law have taken over UC Davis, BRB crying over the resilience.
Anger and tension running high at the University of California Davis campus. What you just saw played out late last week is the Student Government Association voted on a resolution to boycott the Jewish state of Israel.
They kept showing it over and over again. And they just said that the Muslim students forced the pro-Israel students to leave the room.
Reports say when the Israel supporters tried to object to this vote, the pro-Palestinian students you just saw tried to shout them down with cries of Allahu Akbar.
I invite you now to stand up. Really, stand up. And join me in walking out of the room.
Of course, we know that they left willingly, and they stated that they were going to walk out of the room.
It's incredible to hear Allahu Akbar shouted in the middle of this university.
And what does that represent, Megan? The subjugation of women, the torture of homosexuals, the torture of Christians, the crucifixion of Christians. That's what it has come to represent, and that's what they're shouting.
Were you in touch with the embassy, or were you in touch with like any of the groups?
Pretty much all of the groups. Not the embassy, I guess our consulate.
As well as the Israeli consulate in San Francisco, Julia's anti-BDS campaign and the guidance of several pro-Israel lobby groups.
Stand With Us helped us a little bit in terms of actual research on the speech and gave us some like legal research type stuff. I'm always biased to want to work with APAC, so they kind of helped for like more support. And David Project helped us a little bit. It was more help like gaining contact in like the media world. I guess we needed money to pay for somebody to film the speech.
Despite the passing of the BDS motion, the governors of the university known as regents are under no obligation to abide by the students' vote.
As for that resolution to boycott Israel, well, UC Regents issued a statement saying they will not even entertain the idea.
After looking back on everything, I feel a little creepy because of what happened after the vote. People that were affiliated with the group just were smeared and had to deal with these very personal crises of the world calling us terrorists and the world thinking that we were this spiteful hate group. It's pretty unequivocal how organized they were, how brutal and ruthless that narrative was, and how it affected us in the end.
Outside AIPAC's 2017 annual conference, the first protesters were American Jews. AIPAC is facing a challenge from the constituency whose views it was formed to represent.
You do not represent the best of the Jewish prophetic tradition, and we here to bear witness to that.
One of the groups involved was Jewish Voice for Peace.
The work that Jewish Voice for Peace does is grounded in Jewish tradition, the most basic Jewish and human values that every single person has inherent worth and dignity and should be treated with respect. We then see what's happening to Palestinians, the occupation, the displacement, the inequality, and say we need to end those things.
There were few pro-Israel demonstrators. Most wanted to project their strength through Israel's relationship with the United States. The Jewish Defense League, with its distinctive yellow insignias, was a small but threatening presence. Its members later attacked a Palestinian-American man. I can't wait! I can't! American Jews are even taking their protest to Jerusalem. The Israeli government official who launched a covert campaign to spy on American citizens recognizes that Israel is facing a generational time bomb.
אנחנו היום לא רק שאיבדנו את הדור השני של היהודים, שזה דור המילניום של היהודים, אני שומעת את זה מההורים שלהם שבאים להיפגש איתי ומסבירים לי כמה קשה להם בארוחות שישי מול הילדים שלהם. ולא מכירים במדינת ישראל ולא רואים בנו איזה אנטיטי שצריך להריץ אותו.
All right, hello everyone back. I have Karen, I'm gonna add her. And Mo should be with us in a second. We'll wait maybe a couple of minutes, or 1 minute probably, just to make sure everybody is coming back for the discussion. Okay, I'm gonna add more now. Just waiting maybe 1 minute, have everyone back into the discussion. So we're receiving some comments. I'm gonna post them on the screen as they come in. First one is from Dr. Dweri, my colleague. And the second one is from Dr. Bayoun, another colleague of mine. Mo, if you could put the camera on, we can't see you. Okay, we can see something blue now. Right. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. I'm gonna start while Mo tries to figure his camera out. Let me start by actually doing the official introductions of our guest speakers. And let me remind you, for those of you who missed the introduction at the beginning, that my name is Dr. Ahlam Muhtasab. I'm a professor of media studies at California State University, San Bernardino. I'm also the director of the Center for the Study of Muslim and Arab Worlds at CSUSB. And we are joined by actually people from around the world. We are very excited. I hope you were able to view the film either with us or at the link that we shared with you guys. Also, I'm going to put another link for the YouTube for the full documentary, which is about 3 hours, 17 minutes. I watched all of them and I took notes, extensive notes, and I actually did a presentation to my faculty union back in January on the infringement on our academic freedom and freedom of speech. So I will start by, I will start by introducing our first guest speaker. We will have a chat with her until we get Mo back. And she's Ms. Karen Holmes. She's an activist and researcher focused on the intersection of colonialism and incarceration. She graduated last year from SOAS, University of London, with a master's degree in post-colonial studies. Welcome, Karen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much. And Mo is just going to hop off and try to hop right
there.
So there we go.
Hello. Okay, well, let me then introduce Mo, and then I will ask you the first question. And for everyone else, if you have any questions, please ask them in either on Facebook or on YouTube. I receive them actually on StreamYard, which is my first time, but I think I'm getting it right. Again, in defiance of Zoom and its silencing of Palestinian voices and supporters of Palestinian voices. So let me introduce Mr. Mo or Muhammad Al-Qasim. He is a BDS and Palestinian community organizer. But let me explain what BDS is before I go on. BDS stands for the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement against Israel, which is organized by the Palestinian Civil Society and their supporters around the world. So he is a community organizer based in Toronto, Ontario, and a graduate of York University. Originally from Nablus, Palestine, Mo is involved in multiple aspects of the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, including the student organizing, Palestinian prisoners, labor, and Arab community organizing. So welcome again, welcome Mo, of course, and welcome Karen again. And we are very thankful for you, both of you, especially, of course, Karen, for bridging, these 3 hours and 17 minutes into only 67 minutes. And as a filmmaker myself, I know how difficult it is to do the process of condensing so much valuable information. Obviously, some of our viewers have expressed their shock at the revelations of the film. And as I said at the beginning, that was my experience with many of my colleagues. But for me, this was just a reminder of all the things I had to face, both as a student and then a faculty, and I will talk about those later. But let me start with Karen first and ask you this question. First, if you could just explain to us, the process of making the film, how it came about, first in the UK, then the US, and also the censorship attempt, especially for the lobby in the United States. And I'm sorry, I'm putting more than one question. And lastly, why did you make the cut? What motivated you to produce the cut? Anything you could share with us about the film itself, we would really appreciate it.
Sure. So the Lobby UK came out, I believe, in 2016. And that was an investigation of the Israel lobby in the United Kingdom. And that actually came out. It was aired on the Al Jazeera network. But the Israel lobby US was also produced in 2016, but it was never released. So the original lobby documentary is a 4-part series made by Al Jazeera. And there was a lot of reporting, there is a lot of reporting that exists about the pressure campaign to stop its release. And those reports include that even as high up as former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was involved in trying to stop its release. Ted Cruz and several other politicians called Tony, the name of the undercover reporter in the film, a spy. And Morton Klein, the president of the Zionist Organization of America, claimed that he had advocated the Qatari government to prevent the release of the film. The Qatari government press office denied these claims, but certainly we don't have the full story about why it was never released on the network. So, and then it was ultimately leaked in 2018 to several news outlets, including to Electronic Intifada in the United States. And essentially what we see is a nexus of censorship. This is a film about censoring Palestinian activists. And the film itself was censored by the lobby that it attempts to expose. And I think what that says is pretty profound. They were criticized, but Al Jazeera's reporting is legal, it's legitimate. The undercover reporting, the undercover cameras are all legal. Efforts to censor the film aimed simply to suppress criticism of one of the most powerful lobbies in the United States, which itself is engaging in potentially illegal activity that's depicted in the film. So yeah, I guess after it was censored and never came to light, it was a film that really impacted me and resonated with so many of the experiences I was seeing my friends have, the people that I know ending up on Canary Mission and on these blacklisting websites, and really thinking that it had the power to be a tool of education, and that there was a lot of power in being able to show it specifically on campuses, where so much of this film is not about campuses. But I really found that the piece that I wanted to pull out was about all of the counterinsurgency campaigns targeting student activists. And yeah, that's why I put together this cut of the film and tried to make it more accessible to students and to college campuses.
Thank you very much, Karen, for this historiography of the film. I will ask you a quick question, and then I will move to Mo. But can you tell us, give us an update of where the film is now, and any news about the film before we move to Mo?
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, other than what I've already said, the film is essentially in limbo. Al Jazeera has never made a statement that they are censoring it, that it will not be released, but rather that it will be delayed. But it's been 4 years now, and nothing has come of it. So I don't anticipate that Al Jazeera will ever release it.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All right, Mo. First, I guess having experienced some of the things that we have just seen in the film as a student when I was in my master's degree and then my PhD degree, is a painful reminder, of course. And I guess you had a similar experience actually yourself. If you, as a student, you graduated, but if you can share a few of the experiences, if you could address that with us, and then I would like also to share my own experience, latest experience with my film, with my documentary. And before I let you go, please look at the link to the full documentary of The Lobby USA, 3 hours 17 minutes. Mo?
Yeah, absolutely. I really resonated a lot with this film, even the campus cut version. Personally, just speaking to my own experience, I've been doxxed. There have been attempts at physically assaulting me on campus at York University, as well as other students. There have been harassments, videotaping, all sorts of verbal harassment and racist insults being thrown at you as a Palestinian activist. For a while, and this still does happen every now and then. I do get weird phone calls from unknown numbers and some really unpleasant text messages, to put it that way. Most likely from supporters of the state of Israel. Somehow they were able to get hold of my phone number and one of my email addresses and use that as a form of harassment. So the film did resonate with me as a student activist, as someone who's been organizing a lot in the student scene. And in hindsight, I think a lot of this could be more or less avoided, possibly if we refine our strategies as student activists. And I did want to mention something which Karen touched on, is that there is a lot of emphasis on campus groups, and the persons working for pro-Israel groups do emphasize that themselves. Now, the main reason in short form why that is because universities are a crucial site of the reproduction of social and class relations. And they are the site of rethinking the world around us. And Palestine is one of those topics that will be discussed, that will be rethought, and actions, discussions around Palestine will happen on campus. That is just a crucial starting point. So pro-Israel groups and pro-Israel individuals will attempt to attack individuals and organizations that are present on university campuses. And we're seeing that all across North America, and that's why they are following the strategy that they're currently following. One of the things that obviously hit me really strong, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the students that were watching this documentary could identify with, was the Canary mission profiling and the blacklisting. When we do engage in political activity and advocacy, we have to be aware that a lot of or a large segment of our lives will be available through social media. And we have to be extremely wary of what we put out there. That I'm largely referring to the political content, but I'm also referring to the personal content because they will try to smear and attack your character. They'll try to attack you as a person. And that's where we see an example of a young Muslim girl being accused of, things that she's never engaged in. And that's to defame her character, ruin relationship with family and friends, etc., etc. That is the attempt that is at play. So when we think of ourselves as activists, when we do engage in all of this, we have to be extremely wary that whatever we put out there, whether it's in private or public, could be very well seen by A, state authorities, B, pro-Zionist organizations and individuals. So one of the things that I always advise student activists now that I'm graduated is to be extremely aware of what you do put out there. Read over it 2, 3, 4 times if needed. Do not by any means put any of your personal information or any accounts of your personal life on your social media profiles, on any of them. And Twitter is probably one of the worst ones to use if you're talking about your personal life. As far as the other ones, there's probably a lesser concentration of documentation. When we look at Canary Mission, we see that a large number of the profiles, or probably most of them, all of them, will have some sort of documentation through Twitter, not so much through Facebook or Instagram or other forms of social media. So we have to be cautious there. We have to be able to guard ourselves and not give any opportunity to be attacked as individuals. It does cause physical, psychological, and emotional exhaustion that will hinder your political advocacy. And that is mentioned by the pro-Israel individuals in the movie itself. They're distracting you from being able to do the work that you're supposed to do. So I'll wrap it up over there. I don't want to extend too much.
No, it's okay. I have other questions for you. Excuse me. But first, I just want to link my own experience to yours. And that's, one of the reasons why, my colleague at the, the board of the Center for the Study of Muslim and Arab Worlds decided to screen the film and have this conversation because they have been supportive of me in my journey. So as a student, as I said, I had my share of harassment, intimidation, etc. It wasn't like this at that time because we didn't have social media. I'm not that old, but let's put it at that. But a more, tangible example was actually my current husband, who at that time was my fiance, and we were both in grad school at the University of Memphis in Tennessee. For him, because we were activists and we brought, I think it was after we brought a photo exhibition to campus about the Intifada, pictures of the oppression of Palestinians from an award-winning photographer, international photographer. We were really we were on the main page of the major newspaper in the whole region. So it wasn't social media. We were actually on the newspaper. And one of the benefactors from the university who actually donated to the college of my husband, Mahmoud Zubaydi, who was supposed to get his fellowship scholarship at that. Well, actually, it was kind of like fellowship at his master's, put so much pressure at the department that he had been donated to the extent that they took away his fellowship from him. And he had to find other means to continue, funding his master's degree. When I, as a professor, so Canary Mission, of course, I have a profile on Canary Mission, like anyone else who even some of those names, the blacklist of Canary Mission might have only put a comment somewhere or might have signed a petition once in their life. Some of them are not even activists, but they are blacklisted, and they try to find anything against them, as you said, Mo, from even their personal, postings. For me, I spent over 10 years making my documentary on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, 1948 Creation and Catastrophe. And it was a highly scholarly, well-researched documentary that my co-producer, co-director, Andy Trimlett, and I put our lives and hearts into. It was crowd-funded, it was a community, basically, project, independent. We did not get any funding from even federal grants or anything like that. And we interviewed Palestinians, Israelis, historians from across the board. I will put the link in a minute. But it was amazing just discussing the history of the year 1948, which led to the creation of the State of Israel and, of course, the ethnic expulsion of Palestinians. Just discussing that, even in a scholarly manner, like, publishing a book or an article, scholarly article, was forbidden. So we faced a lot of pushback, a lot of silencing of our screenings. But I think the majority of attacks were really at me. It's like the Orientalist stereotypical image of the Muslim, Arab, Palestinian woman who could not be trusted with making a documentary, something scientific, something scholarly about it. She could not be trusted, seriously. And the highlight was, so we had a lot of those. I don't have time to go over all of these, but the highlight was when we tried to screen at the city of West Hollywood as part of their human rights speaker series. And at the first, the staff were happy, we cooperated. They wanted a panel of scholars on the conflict. We got, a great panel from UCLA, USC, etc. And then the campaign started against us. And so they started postponing the screening date without telling us why. They said, "Oh, we need more time to promote it." And I was like, "You sold out, online, they sold out. So why do you need to promote it more when you sold out?" Anyway, somebody leaked an email to us from a rabbi, in West Hollywood, who basically copied and pasted from Canary Mission to the council, the city council members who are elected, and we're under pressure as politicians, of course. Anyway, we went back and forth for 6 months almost. And at the end, after 5 rescheduling attempts to silencing us, we pushed back, because it's our academic freedom, and freedom of speech is a constitutional right. In April of 2019, they tried to even change the laws of the city of West Hollywood, where they give the programming authority to the city council members and take it out of the staff members so they could cancel it. But I had to sit down through, I think, 47 negative comments against me, accusing me all kinds of things, like you mentioned, like what you saw in the film. People who had never any interaction with me. They don't know me. They did not even bother to research me. They just went with Canary Mission. And people who had never seen the film, they were talking also only from talking points. But I went and I addressed them, and at the end, the vote was 3-2, and we were allowed to screen. We screened on April 15th. So on that note, I would like to take it back to first Karen and then Mo. So for Karen, I want to ask you, how do you perceive the power of this documentary? I mean, I could talk forever about how it just came and really confirmed all of our doubts, etc. But how do you see it yourself? And have you had ever any similar experiences that you could talk about?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that your experience watching the film is a really common one for Palestinian activists. Essentially, that we know these things, but it's just very rare to see them in person. It's very rare that we get to see the people who are targeting us, who are attempting to blackmail and dox us so explicitly. And so I don't think that this film, I think for people who don't know about all of these censorship and blacklisting campaigns, that this whole landscape is really shocking. But for people who do this work, I think that it's less surprising, and it just more confirms what we already know about the forces that are working to disorganize Palestine liberation work. And I'll just say that while the film is really devastating in many ways, it's devastating to see all of the work being done to disorganize student activists. I also believe that this film and the multi-million-dollar campaigns targeting student organizers that the film depicts evidence of the power of grassroots student organizing. Student and faculty activists are radically shifting discourse and public opinion about Israeli apartheid and the ongoing colonization of Palestine. And the power of this organizing and this political change is incredibly threatening. And that is why Israeli intelligence and US-based pro-Israel lobby groups are shuffling millions of dollars, really millions and millions of dollars, into the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, into lobby groups like the Israel on Campus Coalition, that do the work of censoring and suppressing social justice movements. And essentially, the strategies that we see in the film, which I would qualify all as counterinsurgency strategies, the surveillance, the smear campaigns, the legal actions, are all strategies that are used against a variety of social justice movements. And that would also include the movement for Black Lives. And I think the film depicts a really important scene, which is when the lobby organizes to prevent a Black Lives Matter event from happening in New York City. And it just shows that even solidarity with Palestine, not even explicitly being a Palestine organizer, makes your movement a part of the collateral damage of this campaign and the targeting. And so even anti-racist organizing happening in the state that is largely unrelated to Palestine, is focused on domestic US police terror, even that becomes a target of the Israel lobby by way of acting in solidarity with the people of Palestine. And then I guess I'll just say that while the film depicts efforts to target and disorganize this movement, I really hope that it can be invigorating and lead to us to understand the power of the Palestinian freedom struggle and the organizing being done on campus by 18, 20-year-olds all across the country who are up against some really big machinery of counterinsurgency.
Thank you, Karen. We have a question from one of the viewers from YouTube, actually. I'm going to put it here and read it as well. And it might be mainly for Mo, but also you're free to comment on it, of course. So is there any legal consultancy office, such as the Louis Brandeis Center, which we saw in the film, to provide protection to BDS or SJP activists? Let me remind everyone, BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, and SJP stands for Students for Justice in Palestine. It's an activist student group. So Mo, do you want to start, or it's up to you guys?
Yeah. Karen, this is more US. I'm Canada-based, so if you want to go towards that.
Yeah.
I forgot. Okay.
I would highlight Palestine Legal, which is doing really incredible work. Besides this documentary, I think that they produce some of the most helpful research mapping all of these attempts to stifle campus organizing around the country. And other than that, I would say the Center for Constitutional Rights is also doing some pretty important work, also related to anti-BDS legislation. And I know in conversations I've had with students around the country, activists are calling on Palestine Legal and are working with Palestine Legal, and that is helpful, but it's not enough. I mean, we're up against, students are up against really, really powerful players.
Okay, actually, I'm trying to get back the the screen the way it used to be, and I can't figure it out. I apologize. So I just want to add that also the ACLU has intervened before to monitor events for Students for Justice in Palestine, the Palestinian Youth Movement, and other activist student organizations. Maybe to an extent, the National Lawyers Guild sometimes had been also in some cases involved, but those are, thank you, the main support groups. I don't know about Canada, but do you have anything to add, Mo?
Yeah, while in Canada we don't necessarily have Palestine League of the sort, there are a lot of movement lawyers and movement activist lawyers we consult with and work with. I would say the two main resources that you have at your disposal.
Can you raise your voice a little bit? Sorry.
Sorry?
Your voice is a little bit low. If you can raise it a little bit.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, much better. So in Canada, while we don't have a Palestine legal that the US has, I would recommend two main resources or sources. The Civil Liberties Association, or any of their connected departments, depending on your province, and the Movement Defense Committee, or Movement Defense lawyers, or legal observers. And they have in the past attended rallies and or events relating to Palestine, and they've given testimonies and written reports as to events that occurred on spot. So these are the two main resources that I would advise student activists in Canada to seek beforehand and even after an event occurs.
All right, thank you for your answer and for adding this. So we have two questions from Dr. Ahmad Bayoun. The first one, I'm going to post it, is what is Tony doing now? Karen probably knows, and then I will post the other question after you answer.
Yeah, Tony was publicly revealed to be the reporter James Kleinfeld. And James Kleinfeld still works for Al Jazeera and still works in their investigations unit and has since done a few other documentaries. I believe he has a public Twitter profile now, but yeah, is still working for Al Jazeera.
He does have a Twitter. He's we follow each other on Twitter. So let me put his second question. Can you please explain the relationship between SJP, BDS, and Black Lives Matter? I could do that, but I'll let you, if you want to do that yourselves first.
Just, yeah, I guess what I was saying earlier, and I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that. Black Lives Matter, and now I'm going to forget the year that this happened, maybe in 2015, made a statement in solidarity with the people of Palestine and making an explicit statement against Israeli apartheid, and as a result has been targeted by the Israel lobby in the same ways that activists have been depicted in the documentary. And the example that we have in the documentary is that the Israel lobby organized to cancel a Black Lives Matter fundraising event in New York City, and that was the Israel Project, which was depicted in the film.
Thank you. So again, I just want to explain that SJP stands for Students for Justice in Palestine. It's a student activist group that is actually a coalition of it's not only Palestinian, of students of all walks of life. BDS is Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, which is a movement that started by a call in 2005 of the Palestinian civil society under, the brutal occupation and reoccupation of the West Bank by Israel, for all, world civil society organizations to support, boycott and divestment and sanctions against the state of Israel to end its oppression of the Palestinian people and its colonial rule. And lastly, Black Lives Matter movement, what that is. All right, so I have a question for Mo. Just a second, Mo, I have your question here that I prepared earlier. Just seeing that and listening to your experience, and of course my experience, especially as students, how do students activists continue to do their work, while facing threats of state surveillance, harassment, intimidation, libel, defamation, you name it, how can someone actually continue? And I also very briefly heard about that those, Canary Mission would actually take down a profile of someone if they do a long pledge. They would never ever do anything related to Palestine, etc. So, like this unbelievable, brutal, violent tactic, silencing tactic. If you could also address that, thank you.
That's a very good question. So, in relation to the first part of the question, how do you continue doing your work? It's almost become a running joke at this point that any Palestine solidarity activist, and particularly any Palestinian student activist, would almost become a pre-law or a law student at this point, and very relevant in the case of Canada. What I mean here is that you have to know your rights. You have to know the legal terrain in front of you. So while you are doing your activism, you need to be extremely aware of what you are entitled to do and say, and what you are not entitled to. That will require you to do a little bit of your own research, but to also seek legal counsel or legal guidance in a lot of cases. So that is number one. I would say number two is student activists and groups such as SJPs or SPHRs or PSCs or any other derivative of student activist clubs would have to provide their own internal strategies as how to combat this. You see, so one example is I recall this as if it was yesterday. I was tabling at York University, and I was at some point ambushed by about 3 to 4 Zionist individuals, and they began shouting and screaming at me and video recording me and trying to force me into a cornered position where I would say something that would be decontextualized and implicate me in some illegality or some crossing of the student code of conduct. What my colleagues at the time at the university did was they blocked the video cameras from recording me almost immediately. And at the same time, the security on campus were called, and the persons who were videotaping were forced to delete the videos. And that was that. So you have to have a strategy as to how to act in emergency situations. Now, that is number one. Number two, sorry. Number three is you have to be able to educate and guard your internal membership. It is more likely that pro-Israel individuals and pro-Israel groups will try to send quote unquote spies or members to infiltrate, or however you want to phrase that, into your SJP or SPH or whatever, and try to get hold of your internal documents and your personal profiles or your whatever. So you have to be able to look at each and every person who comes through your student club and to do some sort of a background check on them. And this was the case in my student activism. I've actually caught multiple people trying to infiltrate and trying to get hold of a document that they're not supposed to get hold of, and leak it to the outside and try to frame it as, BDS is this BDS group is a hate group and they're supporters of jihad and some weird Orientalist, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim nonsense that they always spew out. So that is number 3. I would say, yeah, do devise an internal strategy as how you vet members into your club. Guard your members, provide them with training. Do not have any sort of personal information be available online, because it is very easy to get hold of someone's phone number and house address. And that is how myself and others were targets of doxing, targets of harassment, violence, etc., etc. So do devise these strategies. And Ahlam, if you could please remind me of the second part of the question so I could answer that.
No, I said that, related to how can we continue the work with such intimidation. I just mentioned what did they call it? The petition, not petition, but pledge that Canary Mission forces people to do in order to take out their profiles from Canary Mission. And I just want to tell people that this could have very serious consequences, especially on students, especially when they want to get a job. So let me tell you a true story of one of my relatives. I'm not going to say his relationship to me because he wants to remain actually anonymous. But that person graduated last year, September of 2019, and started, applying for positions in engineering. Got excellent, interviews. Everybody liked him, but after the interview, he never got any, job offers. And it's interesting because in that field there is a huge demand for his expertise and his credentials. And it was hard really to prove that it was Canary Mission until another relative of mine who actually recommended him for one of his friends in Arizona who was looking for that type of engineering degree and did the interview very successfully. He liked him, but then he called the other relative and said, "Oh my God, who is this person? Oh my God, like this person is accused of supporting terrorism. Why did you recommend this person to me?" He was very upset, and said, "Please, don't send me those anymore." And that was actually the concrete evidence of the impact. It's not a joke, it's not a joke. I mean, some people are smart enough to go beyond it, but unfortunately it has, serious impact on the future of students in particular. And of course on our academic reputation, because not all people have the critical thinking skills necessary to decipher the information and see how ridiculous it is. And I want to mention one thing. So actually in Canary Mission, usually they have one formula they use for everyone: inciting terrorism, anti-Semitism, blah blah. It's the same formula. But once you start reading the evidence, there is nothing. I challenge anyone, nothing whatsoever. They would say something. She posted this, or she signed this petition. So there are really no evidence whatsoever to back up their huge, unbelievable accusations. Sorry, go ahead, and we are about to wrap up, but please go ahead.
Yeah. So as hard and as tough as it is to have a Canary Mission profile or to be on any other sort of a blacklist, I know it might seem appealing to sign that pledge or to write a letter that says you would never engage in any Palestine solidarity activism. Now, that is dangerous on two fronts. One is you are putting yourself in a situation where you are never going to be engaging politically with anything related to Palestine. And that is their goal. They want you to be out of the picture. They want to remove as many activists and organizers out of the picture permanently. Number two, it's an admission of guilt. And in the predominant majority of cases, particularly on Canary Mission, there isn't an ounce of truth to a lot of their accusations, or the accusations that are being targeted or leveled at students. So while it does seem appealing to sign that pledge or write the pledge and have the profile taken down, it would be more harmful in the long run to actually do that, because the profile itself was never written by you. The profile itself is very arbitrary and abstract. What is written by you or signed by you is that pledge, where you are admitting guilt to something that you were probably never, a sentiment that you probably never held, or bigotry that you never were part of. So, as you know, just in conclusion, I know employment is a large part of all of our lives, but there are other ways to go around it. You do have legal options, you do have civil liberties, and I would advise all student activists to seek out all of their options and not sign any pledge for Canary Mission or any other sort of a blacklist.
I totally agree with you. We are exactly 2:01 actually. But would you like to add anything, final comments, maybe in 1 or 2 minutes? We'll start with Karen.
Yeah, I'm just really grateful that we got to show this film here today and to be on this panel with you all. And I know that it's, again, is a scary film and can deter people from engaging in this movement, but that's really not the point of showing it. On the contrary, I hope that it inspires people to get engaged and to push back against these efforts of counterinsurgency that Palestinian organizers are facing all the time, and to stand in solidarity with students who end up on the collateral damage of all of these surveillance and smear campaign operations. These 18-year-olds who end up on Canary Mission, they need support, and they need folks who understand that, again, that all the claims on Canary Mission are illegitimate, and that these are freedom fighters and these are social justice organizers who are being targeted by a very, very powerful lobby in the United States.
And sorry, I said we are going to end before I give it to you for your final thoughts. So we have a question from Professor Danny Dwary. He is asking if Canary Mission has ever been sued for libel and defamation. I will answer that very quickly, and if you want to add anything, please jump in. No, the answer is no. We actually tried. I tried personally. I know other people tried. I think they get, high quality legal advice when it comes to how they do things, where they walk a fine line. And also part of it, like I was in conversations with Palestine Legal, with private lawyers. I did not give up yet, but now it's a lot of people actually believe strongly that the reason for this is because the Israeli Mossad, actually the Israeli intelligence, is behind Canary Mission. So it's a high-level surveillance by the state of Israel, which is hard for activists with no resources really to combat. How can you, and even if you want to go for legal action, that means thousands and thousands of dollars, to be spent on such lawsuits that might be very hard to prove. In my case, for example, I was told that I was not a private citizen because of my film. So in a way, like I lost some of my protection, against libel. Would you like to add anything? How about you, Mo? Have you heard of any cases of?
Not at all. Yeah, and I completely agree with everything that you said, Ahlam. It's because they do walk a very fine and very thin line. how they portray and how they write things. So that's why there hasn't been any attempt, but who knows? Perhaps in the future there would be.
We never give up. Here we are using StreamYard in defiance of Zoom. Karen.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that we have, especially through the film, learned more about Canary Mission. It's been an anonymous site since its inception, and the film at least implicates the Israel on Campus Coalition as being involved in the production of Canary Mission, and also Adam Milstein potentially funding it. So, and we, even if Mossad is not involved in its production, we know that Israeli intelligence uses Canary Mission even at its borders to deny people entry in the country through based on their Canary Mission profile. So we are learning more about its production.
Yes. Right. I guess that leads us to the end of this session. I'm so grateful to have Karen Holmes and Mo Al-Qasim or Muhammad Al-Qasim with us today. Thank you for your bravery and for standing up for what is right, for your willingness to address this very critical and scary issue. And thank you for our audience from around the world. I actually just received a text from Kuwait. So people are joining. And I know someone is joining us from Australia and at least one from Europe. So maybe we don't have a lot of attendance, but we do have quality attendance from around the world. And thank you for the excellent questions, everyone. Maybe we will do this again in spring. We'll see. But have a great day, everyone. I'm gonna end now. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Mo.
Thank you, Karen.
You can stay, actually. I'm gonna end the broadcast. So we have a lot of thank yous. I'm gonna put them here. Dr. Machete is also one of my colleagues.